Welcome everyone to the ArchiCAD user training webinar for October 2018. This is Eric Bobrow, and it's my pleasure to bring to you another free training session where we'll be going over some really cool things. Let me know that you can hear me and that you can see my screen, and type into the chat window as well where you're calling in from. It's always fun to see where everyone's coming from. So I'm going to read this off here. Let's see. All right. So Marlene, Tom from Seattle, Jeannie from Amsterdam, Charlottesville, Denver, Slovakia, Andrej, Portland. Okay. Richard from Down Under, Scott in Houston. Okay. Vermont. Oh, it goes on and on. New Zealand, Glenn. Hey. Lennox, Grenada. Okay. Yeah, so we got a bunch of people on the line. I'm sure a few more will come in as we get rolling. So in this month's session, we're going to do something a little different. I've been interviewing successful ArchiCAD users, and I do plan to return to that format. But I've been focused recently on developing MasterTemplate 22. And as I did that, I started to really dig into some of the graphic tricks that are so powerful for changing the way that your model and your plans and your drawings look. There are so many options that ArchiCAD has now that I think could be used more. Many of you probably will learn some new tricks in today's session. So it's my intention to show you a whole bunch of eye candy, a whole bunch of useful things, and actually explain, most of the step-by-step that will get you there. Now I know that we have a mixture of new and old users or experienced users, so I'm going to start out with just a quick introduction for new users about view settings, because that's a fundamental for everything that we do in ArchiCAD, just in general, and specifically for this presentation. So let's see if I bring up my ArchiCAD here. So this is a sample project that I've been working with for many years. Scott Bulmer, an architect in California, created it for me when we were first setting up MasterTemplate back in 2007. So it's gone back a ways. Now I've reworked it quite a bit this year because I started to really add in more and more of these graphic options. Now you can do all of these things on your own, in your own template, in your own projects. Of course, if you do want something that already has it set up, then MasterTemplate could be a good option for you. Now let's take a look just at the basics of view settings. Take 2 minutes just to say, what's the difference between this view here and this view here? All right, so one is the reflected ceiling plan, one is the floor plan. Now, if I go to what are called model view options, that's the primary difference. In the model view options, we've got it set for reflected ceiling plan, which makes doors and windows show as opening only, and does some other options for the way that walls are shown, etc. If I go to the one that is the standard one here for plan sections, elevations, we'll be seeing doors and windows with markers, etc. So this is the model view options. Now, if I go to, let's say, our 3D view here. So here is a view of the little building, and here's another view here. Now, in these two cases, what's the difference? Well, we've rotated around to a different angle on it, but we've also changed the sun settings. So when we go to the settings for this view, there's various controls, including the model view options that we were just looking at, the layers, which determine what elements are shown. For example, do we want to see the site or not? Do we want to see the interior furniture or not? Things like that. And there's a whole lot of things that are saved, including the 3D window settings for the sun position. So what's the difference between this and the other one? If I rotate around this, you'll see that now we're sort of in the dark, whereas this view here, when I'm looking at it, we're looking at a similar position from the front. So each of these views in our view map saves conditions, all sorts of conditions, and that's what we're going to be looking at, is what settings, what conditions can we use to get very useful output. Now let's start with something, and I'll just bring this back here for a little bit easier viewing, and let me see if I can bring this up, view it, zoom in here. Okay, so now it'll be a little bit easier to see. So we did a very, very quick look at this. Here, let's look at 2D graphic overrides for using model view or model view options and graphic overrides here. Now, if I go to the floor plan, this is a reasonably well-developed model with, interior fit out, some sections and elevations, grid lines, etc. Now, when we're first working, you may want to do some things with schematic views. So I'm going to just make the general statement that a schematic view is sort of a simplified view. It just shows the basic framework layout of the building. If I double click here on first floor plan, what do we see? All right, we're seeing, obviously the same building. We've turned off certain layers using a different layer combination, so we're not seeing the grid lines and the section markers, etc. But if we zoom in on, an area here, we're going to see that the walls are now shown in a very simplified fashion. The windows and doors very simplified. So this is a schematic view, and if we compare it to our floor plan view, we'll see that it is exactly the same model. It just has to do with turning off certain elements in the layers and changing the style of the elements here in the schematic format. Now, how is this accomplished here? And I'm going to basically change a setting for all of these so that they ignore the zoom. Actually, so let's see if I ignore here this settings for ignore zoom. What that'll mean is that if I come in and out of it, it won't jump me to a new position like this was. So we'll say ignore zoom. So now if I'm in here and I go back to this view here, I can switch between this view and the other view without having it jump around. Makes it much easier to see what's going on. So let's look at two things, model view options and graphic overrides. So in ArchiCAD 20 plus, this is 22, we have the quick options bar at the bottom. In earlier versions of ArchiCAD before version 20, we didn't have that bar. So you could get access to this through the document model view options. That's the same as clicking this little button here. Now, in this particular combination, we're saying show the door, but let's look at the detail level of doors and windows. And you can see that this is choosing the detail level to be just a very low one. So in other words, when we're in a schematic option for the model view options, then we're turning the doors and windows to be much more simplified. And in fact, in 3D, they're also going to be simplified if we use this same option. So that's as compared to the standard one we're using for plan sections and elevations, where we have more detail here. Now, in addition, we've got some what are called graphic overrides. So the graphic overrides, you can see when I press down here, have many variations depending upon your template and your project setup. We're looking at something called simplified drawing. And if I wanted to say, well, what is simplified drawing got in it? When I click on this button, it'll do the same as document graphic overrides, and it'll open up the graphic overrides here. So simplified drawing has a few rules that are applied. If I look at them one at a time, cut fills, that's when you're cutting through a wall in the plan, or a wall, roof, or slab, or other things in a section. So when you're cutting through, what do you see? And it's basically saying that the cut fills are empty, white, opaque. So it's saying anything that any type of element, if it is a cut fill here, we're setting it to empty. So it's basically removing all the hatching and detail of that. And it's also setting the fill background pen for the cut fills. You notice this little highlight here to, in this case, pen 91, which in the US version is traditionally been a white pen. If you're an international version, you'd have the equivalent, but it would be a different pen number there. So this is one of the rules. There are several here. Each one of these rules you can create or tweak. And then when you need to or want to add them in, you can say, I'd like to add in another rule, and you can see, you can choose any of these. These will show up in the list. You can also remove anything that you say, oh, I don't need that anymore. There is an order of the rules to be applied. I think that it starts at the lowest one, and then the one at the top is the one that's the last one that's applied, but I can't remember now. I just experiment in case it doesn't work. There is a sequence that it's being done here. So we've basically made the cut fills, which where the walls are, that's a primary thing that we're seeing here, empty. Now let's take a look in 3D. Or actually, let's take a look at another variation. So if I go to sketch plans and I click on it, you'll see that this is now a similar plan except for two main differences. One is it's a different layer combination. So we're seeing furniture, you know, like the bed and the couch, etc. And we've got squiggly lines. Okay, so what are the differences here? So one is that we were using a different layer combination. So the layer combinations, if we just open that up for newer users, the condoc furniture in this case, in this master template thing, these are all the construction documents. Furniture turns on certain layers, turns off others. And what is special here, of course, is that the furniture layer is turned on. The furniture layer is only shown in the furniture plan and a few other limited ones where we're showing the building interior with furnishings, etc. So this is a layer that those elements are on. So obviously, when we turn that on, we start seeing these things. Now, what makes this sketchy? Now, you may look at this and say, God, that's ugly, and you know that's really, I don't like that line type. You know, here, look at it when we zoom out, and you'll see that if you were to take a screenshot of it, that it just sort of has a nice feel to it in terms of just not quite as hard-edged as the schematic one here where everything's crisp here. So depending upon what you need here, and I'm also going to change this settings to say ignore the zoom. So basically when we go into it, it won't jump out to the fit-in window here. So I'm always finding little things to tweak there. Now let's look at some elevations and sections, and we'll start seeing some additional options that we can do with graphic overrides and model view options that are just fantastic, things that you couldn't do before ArchiCAD 20 or 21, and now it's just gotten simpler and simpler as we go into 22 and beyond. So if I go to, let's say, an elevation here. So this elevation is showing, of course, the hatching and some shadows. It's actually the same elevation viewpoint as this one. So this one here, which is in color, is based on the marker settings. So if I right-click anywhere and say elevation settings, we can see what that marker on the plan is saying, and that marker has some settings saying shoot from this angle here, and it's saying that we want to have sun shadows and just sort of nominally 45 degrees over the shoulder to just get a nice even presentation, not where the sun is for the particular day of the year, or that it's only on this side of the house, it's never on the north side of the house, things like that. But it does have shadows. It's also saying that we're going to fill the uncut surfaces. That would be the parts that are, you know, just beyond the cut plane. And in an elevation, virtually everything would be beyond the cut plane. And it's saying, do this with own surface colors non-shaded. Now you can experiment with this, but this particular one will give it the colors, you know, like the slightly brownish brick and gray, you know, tile and things like that. It'll give us some color, but it is non-shaded. It's going to allow us to turn on and off shadows when we want to. So this is something that seems to be the most optimized for this type of flexibility. And it also has, I think, what was it? There it would be vectorial 3D hatching is turned on. So that's why we have all these little line work things. Now, if I go to, and you'll see that it says no override. So it's basically, this is the raw view without any overrides. Now let's look at some of the variations. So the one that we have that is similar here, this is the same viewpoint. If I were to draw on top of it, it's the exact same view there, but it's got a graphic override here, condoc elevations, no shading. Now, if we go into the graphic overrides, and you can click the little icon next to it, it has a rule that says no shading on the elevations and sections. So shading in this case is shading of color as opposed to shadow. Now, if I go to edit rules, what it's saying is anything in 3D, any of the fills here are going to just have a gray tone and be transparent. So this is basically, I experimented with this. You can make a note here or watch the recording of this video to check it out. But what this will do is, if you use it in a 3D view, it will remove the color shading. So instead of having the different background colors, it'll make everything uniform there. Now, if we go on to different ones, I can say I'd like to say no shading or shadow here, and you'll see that this becomes cleaner. Now, I think on the screen, it's not, at least on my other monitor, it doesn't. I couldn't see the shadows very clearly, but there were shadows there that were that just disappeared, and we can also go to condoc elevations plane. So now what we're doing is we're changing the graphic override, and again, I'll just show you the details of that, to say cover fills are empty. So what are cover fills? Well, in this case, the cover fills were the things that showed the shingles and the stonework and things like that. And the rules here, it says if it's not a zone, this is something that was set up by Graphisoft and I'm just using it, but basically elements that are not a zone, we're going to make the fill type airspace. So I guess that means if you use this cover fills empty and you had a zones, you were doing a diagram with different room usage, it wouldn't make the zone cover fill go to blank. It would leave that alone. But basically it's saying put in airspace or empty fill on top of that. Now the other one that we had that removed the no shadows here as opposed to shading is something, and I'll show you this. You notice it's this graphic fill here. So the fill type, it's making it airspace. So it's basically removing the shadows, which are considered a drafting fill. This is an uncut fill, and this is a cut fill. So there are different types of fills that you do in ArchiCAD. When you're drawing things, you can, if you use the fill tool, you can designate your choice of what this fill is about. But inherently, when you have a slab on the ground and you want to show that slab with tiles, you're going to be using a cover fill because it's showing the top of it. When you cut through the slab or a wall, you're showing the cut fill. And then graphic fills are generally things that you just put in manually, but in this particular case, the shadows are considered a graphic fill. So this is the way that you would achieve that. Now, having done all of these options here, let's take a look at the one that are schematic level. Now, look at this. You can see the windows and doors have some level of detail, which is fine. I mean, it's good for most purposes. But suppose you wanted to have an elevation that was just simpler, like when you were first doing the building and you don't want to say how many divisions the window has or even whether it has a sill. You simply want to have an elevation. Let's see, this is the east elevation here. That's simplified. So how did we get this? And you notice the little sketch lines. The sketch lines are optional. I could change this from presentation elevation sketchy to presentations elevation schematic, and we'll see that it's going to be nice and crisp but simple. So let's look at the one with sketchy, because that actually just does one extra step here. So what it's doing is it's saying turn off the shadows and shading and take off the cover fills, put in some sketchy lines, and it's also doing one more with cut fills. I think that removed the fill that was showing arbitrarily of the ground plane there. So that's what gave me the sketchy. If I go to schematic, it's the same except for the override, which was the sketchy. The sketchy lines can be done by themselves. Here's sketchy lines, and I do have a variation because I've made some variations of sketchy lines. But if we look at the sketchy lines, it's basically saying any type of element, just switch the line when you're drawing it to sketch. Now, in terms of the sketchy line, you can see here's sketch 2, sketch 3, down at the very bottom of your screen where I'm pointing there. And here's the original one. So I basically created different variations for how sketchy the line is. And in today's session, I don't have time to show you, how you create that, but you can basically edit the line types, duplicate it, and change the spacing of the line type, and then resave it. Of course, it's built into this file and into MasterTemplate, but if you want to do that yourself, you can do it. So here I have a sketchy elevation. We can go to other elevations, and basically it's just going to show the basic building. Now, how did we get the doors and windows to be just simplified? Well, that has to do with the model view options, which you see are set to model schematic. Now, these names are arbitrary. They're just part of the way that they're structured in MasterTemplate. But the basic thing is when I go into the model view options here by clicking that icon, actually, I'm sorry, that's the layer combination model schematic. So that's turning off interior furnishings, and it's turning off some, the rafter tails and other little details, and then the site information. But actually here is the model view options. And remember this presentation schematic in 3D, we've got the schematic thing. So that what that does is it makes the doors and windows just simple surfaces. So that's why we've got something much more, basic in terms of the look. And if we compare that again to the north elevation, in this case here, you can see that this is exactly the same building, just with more detail. Now, what's interesting is, when you start out a building, you're always going to have less detail. And as you add more detail, you're going to be able to show more. You've made more decisions, and you want the client to understand it, the builder, of course, etc. But sometimes it's nice with a client, even though you've put in some more detail, to just simplify the darn thing down. Let's go back to the section ones and just see how that's done in the same way. If I go to a section here, so again, now this is a section. It has the sketchy lines, which, if you zoom out on it, you could have a screenshot and just point at things, and it would just have that feeling that, this is just the idea. This is how far we've gotten with that. And it's basically just got the same options for simplifying the model. This is the layers. So we turn off furniture and things like that. We're using the model view options to change the doors and windows to simple views. And you notice this staircase is just a zigzag. So that's an option in the model view options to say, I'd like the stairs to be shown in this way. And you can do things with railings as well. And then the graphic override, that's the one that made all of the fills of the walls just white, and fills of the slabs, etc. So it's just when you cut through it, you're just seeing a simple area. So that's an introduction to graphic overrides and model view options. And now we're going to take it much further in terms of just different variations of 3D views. So let's take a look here. Now there was a question, and I'm definitely will try to look at your questions as you type them in, but I'll only be able to deal with some of them, or to some extent. So let's see. Okay. So Scott says, I have cameras in the sample and now they display on every plan view. So when you have cameras, you'll see sort of different graphic icons saying, well, there's a view from here, a view from there. Those cameras, the only way to turn them off, if we go to the plan, and I know that if we're on here, if we have the camera tool, if we open up the camera tool here and we say we're in a particular, we're looking from one of these camera positions, they're organized in paths. So you can have different groups of views here. And I've set up in MasterTemplate, and you can easily do this yourself, a new path. You can create paths here that has no cameras, and this is the way to turn that off. You can also go into the path setting and say you don't want to see the cameras there, but that's an extra click compared to just going here. So that was Scott's question. So John from Maryland. Hey, John, regarding being able to see things, can ArchiCAD now detach the window so you can see the zoom, for example, of the schematic floor plan on one monitor while seeing the detailed floor plan in another model? You can, if we have this, if I'm looking here, let's say take this 3D view, I can right click on this and say undock tab. Now this will come up in a separate window, and which I can float around. And you could have two windows side by side. I can also move this over to my other monitor if I want. Now, if you're on a Mac, you can freely move it to the other monitor. If you're on a PC, you'll have to make your ArchiCAD window span both monitors. So you know how the window can be smaller, it can fit one screen, or you can manually say, not smaller, I want to make it bigger, and literally drag it over to another monitor. Now, it's blocking everything else behind it, but you can move your windows, if you undock them, over to the other monitor. So I believe that's what you have to do for PC. On a Mac, these windows can be moved around freely anyway. Now, if I want to put this window back, I can have it in the front here. I can bring up whichever window I want, and then I can say dock the window, and that'll put it back into the tab bar up here. Okay. So Jim says, I'm using ArchiCAD 22 Solo. I don't see nearly as many graphic overrides. These are all things that were added, a lot of them by me, for MasterTemplate. I'm training you how you can add them. And, you know, just if you want to have all of these things set up for you, then you could consider getting MasterTemplate. But this is how you can use them, and I'm trying to give you an understanding of how each piece could be set up or can be set up to get different options. Sam Jeffers says, is there any way to add an overstretch to the sketch lines? No, unfortunately, I don't believe there is in ArchiCAD's built-in options. Now, there is a sketch rendering option. So if I were to say I wanted to render this using a sketch rather than a photorealistic option, I believe that they will do some of those things. It doesn't do anything for plan. You can't get a plan drawing that way. And, you know, the controls for those sketch renderings, you can experiment with and see if you end up with an option that you like. Okay. So Jim says, how to view this session as a recording. So we are live right now. I'll say that. And of course, those of you watching the recording later will go, no, he's not. But right now we are. Now, I will be posting the recording on my YouTube channel and on ArchiCAD user website. I don't know, I've been hiding the older recordings on ArchiCAD user to give people an incentive to support my work with ArchiCAD user, so you can always have access to the older recordings if you pay a small monthly fee to, you know, basically help me keep going. This particular one, I'm not sure. I might leave this out in the public, depending upon feedback. If you want me to do that, let me know. All right. Rosemary, what's the logic for what has changed in model view versus graphic override? All right. So if we go to just the view settings here, and we just talk about layer combinations are what is shown. Do we show furniture or not? Do we show trees or not? What layers that you put elements on are going to determine that. Model view options say how elements are shown overall. Do you show it with more detail or less detail? Do you show, in terms of 2D stuff, do you show the markers for doors and windows or not? So it's how you're viewing the model. Now, graphic override sort of is a little confusing with that, but what it does is it only changes the line type, the surfaces or colors or hatches, the sort of graphic effects of the elements, as opposed to, like, if we choose a model view option that turns off the door and window markers, they're gone. With graphic overrides, it can't affect them. If they're showing, they're there. But what it can say is the fill that goes in the center of the walls, should we show all the detail or should we just show it as two parallel lines? And there are some other variations as well. So graphic overrides are more visual. Model view options are sort of what style things are shown in, whether you show them or not. And the layer combinations are, more, well, let's say they're the starting point. Are you going to show furniture, trees, the site, the railings, things like that? Okay, so it gets clearer when you work with ArchiCAD, but hopefully that gives you at least a little bit of a more clarity. All right. Hey, Lawrence says, what's the difference between fills between foreground, background, solid, and empty, and why the introduction of foreground and background when we use solid and empty in airspace? Okay, so there's a lot of redundancy in these fills. If we go to the, what would it be, under options, fills, and we look here, there are solid fills, you can see up at the top here. These first batch here, regardless of their name, are basically percentages. So even if I go to, let's say, glass, it's just what percent is this going to be filled. So solid fills are percentages. Some of them are obvious, by name. 25% is the name, and here others are not. But look at airspace here or background. They're exactly the same. There's 0. So all the fills that are solid are just percentages. Now, you notice all these ones that look white, they will function exactly the same, and you can, use them freely. Now, some of them are associated with building materials. So, for example, when you have a slab and you want to say that there is framing space, instead of saying it's background, you can say it's airspace. And if it's airspace in a building material that's strong, it will cut through things. So you can actually have what's sometimes called hard air or strong air as a building material that if you create something with it, it'll be stronger than other things. It'll create a void. Now, fills, doesn't matter. It's just if the fill is showing and it is 0%, it's empty. So there really is no difference between background, empty fill, airspace, and all of these other variations there. The other ones, just a very, very quick run through, vectorial fills are created with programming languages. In other words, somebody coded some stuff that said draw lines and have a dash and do this, make little dots for concrete and things like that. Virtually impossible for users to create your own vectorial fill, although you can create variations like make it more widely spaced or more tightly spaced or rotate it and things like that. Now, the other type of fills that we can work with more freely are image fills, which are based on actual picture maps. You can see here's a picture of beige carpet or foliage. Here's a picture of something with foliage, or the ones that are what are called, what are they called here? Where's the name? It's called symbol fills. So symbol fills, you can create your own. You can draw some lines and then paste it in and make it, repeat. You have to be very clever to make it look fairly seamless, like the way this looks fairly natural just as it extends, but basically you can create those. So that's a quick review of the different fill types. Solid fills are percentages. Vectorial fills are programmed, very useful, but hard to create your own other than just variations. Image fills are ones that or symbol fills are ones that you can create your own, and then image fills are ones that reference a JPEG or a PNG or TIFF file for their appearance. Okay. Okay, Tom says, what did I find to be the best and quickest rendering settings? I haven't spent much time on rendering, and I don't have any advice I'm going to be sharing today. There are some built-in options for quick rendering versus more detailed. You definitely should test out your initial renders when you're saying, I wonder how this view will work, or I want to make sure this looks good. Do it with a quicker option. And then after you say, yeah, it looks pretty good, I just want it with more detail, I want it with more subtlety, then switch to one of the ones that takes longer. And then possibly tweak the individual settings to get your preferred balance there. Okay, Laura says, how do you make revisions and use the revisions with the drawing list? Okay, revisions are not something that we're going to be talking about today. I know they're a very important part of ArchiCAD, and there's a built-in tool called the Change Manager, and you can make revisions and changes and put a mark and tabulate lists of changes for each individual drawing or for sheets, etc. But I'm not going to cover that today. All right, Jeannie says, is it true that vectorial fills make the drawing lighter as opposed to image fills? I'm not sure what you mean. Any type of symbolic representation where you say fill this area with this thing is going to be relatively light in terms of memory. It simply is just saying, here's a boundary, fill it, and then there's a definition somewhere. So it's not having to think about in the file size all the little lines. It's just saying whenever someone says show this, go get that definition and just draw it. And of course, ArchiCAD usually redraws pretty quickly. Now, if you're exporting to DWG or something like that, sometimes it's good to turn off fills or simplify them, because on the other end, they may get them as a whole bunch of little lines and say, God, it takes so long to clean up your drawings. So maybe send them something simpler. All right, can you buy fills? Dennis Hellier says, I don't know. I don't know if anyone's selling fills these days. Used to be some things like Objects Online that sold various add-ons for ArchiCAD. I know Arca Radar, like Radar Dish, Arca Radar, may have a site that sells certain things, and I'm not quite sure. Okay, Constantino says, thank you. The custom fills might be very helpful. Okay, excellent. Lawrence says, how did I create the path on the sloping terrain and the driveway? That's a little trick. I'm not sure I'll have a chance to show you, but there is a video on my YouTube channel that shows that. It's something to do with solid element operations for site modeling. Solid element operations and site modeling are part of the name. And it basically involves sort of creating a slab where you want the path, telling it that it should intersect with the site. So it basically should not float up above, because slabs always have a flat top. So now it's merged into the site, but the site still is sort of passing through it, and then you subtract out the slab from the site. So you do an intersect from one direction and a subtract from the other, and you end up with this little path in the back, which is going up the grade, and I could just change the boundary of it very easily. All right, so thank you from Tom. And Jeannie says, I've made a couple of vectorial fills. Okay, great. So you've learned the programming language for that. I mean, I wouldn't say it's impossible to learn, but it's certainly a programming language as opposed to a something graphic like symbol fills. Okay, I've gone through all the questions. Now let me get on to the next section of the presentation. All right, so we have looked at a little bit about save views, a little bit about graphic overrides and model view options to create schematic and sketch views and elevations and sections that have a single marker, generate things with all of the color and shading and shadows and textures, but then views in the view map are saying, no, use this graphic override or use a different model view option to get different effects. All right, let's look at 3D styles along with model view options and saved views. So we'll start out with white model. versus an analytic line work. Okay. So I'm going to close up the sketch and schematic views here, and we'll just go to 3D views. So here we are in an overall view here. And if I go now to the 3D window, so this is in MasterTemplate, I have a whole bunch of different variations. The idea being these are all useful things to at least see and compare and say, how is that done? So for example, AXO existing, what happens? Notice that the building changed versus AXO plan status. The only difference here is that we've changed our renovation status. So I'm not going to go into renovation status much here, but I will just say that you're going to have a choice that you can do at any time for what parts of the model you want to show. So the plan status will show things that exist, hide the things that are being removed during this process, and show the new elements. And you can do things with overrides where, for example, we can show all of them with different colors, or we can say just the existing. So we can change all of these options here. Now, let's look at the AXO no shadow. So right now we're looking at this with a shadow. Change it to here. The difference is, and I'll just make this narrower. See down here, now there's enough room to bring up what are called 3D styles. So 3D styles were introduced, I think, it was either 20 or 21. And they're basically a way to quickly switch different ways that you want to look at the model. So if I switch, this is shadows with contours. So we're seeing, or shading with contours. So shading is the color, contours are the line work on the outside here, and no ground plane. You notice that beyond the little sight, there's no ground plane. If I say, give me shading with simple shading here, it's going to be similar, but we actually have a gray background. And if I rotate this up, you can see that it's simulating a ground plane off to the horizon. And if I switch this back to simple shading, no ground plane, then it's all white. And I tend to prefer that, but certainly there are times when having the synthetic ground plane will work. Now, so these are variations of the 3D window style. And if I go here, actually, if we go to the 3D window styles, which are also available in the view menu, it's under, I think, 3D view options, and then it says 3D window styles there. So these are different variations. And of course, in today's training, I can't go through all of them and every little thing, but let's look at the basics of it. So when we have a preset here, it has certain options. When I switch this, you note here is sun shadows, no sun shadows. Simple shading here with two different colors. Simple shading without that, with basically the two colors the same. You can make it white, you can make it black, you can make it any color you like. Now here's a white model, and it's basically saying make it the surfaces monochrome with some contour line, and you can make them black, crisp, you can make them gray, so any color you want. So let's look at white model. And by the way, I can adjust the settings here, but I can also just pick something and then say okay, and that's the same as switching it down here. So here we have the white model, and it looks, it's certainly a way to present to the client where you don't want to focus on the details of stuff. Now you notice that this white model has all the detail for, the railing there. Sometimes you want to be showing it with a more simplified view. So again, we can change our layer combination. Let's say that we just say building only. All right. Now we're seeing the building, and this is the underscore underneath. We're seeing some of the grid markers here. If we switch this to back to building and site, then we're seeing that information. If we go to the what we're looking at here, are we looking at it in presentation mode, all the details, or schematic? And notice all of a sudden this changes. Now, in this mode schematic, you can see that we're seeing through to the inside. If I go to presentation site plan, this is another variation. So these are different variations here, but let's look at how we would get this to be opaque. Well, this is going to be a graphic override, and I think if we do presentation site plan here, no, which one is it? Go to simple AXO white model here. Okay, you can see that this is opaque. And so if we spin around this, you know, it just is focusing the eye on just the basic shapes and forms. And so that's using the graphic override called white model, which is basically saying make everything white. If it's uncut, the rule is if it's uncut here, make the surface white. So that complements the 3D viewing style, which makes everything white but will leave transparency intact. And this is a way to turn that off, saying, you know what, I just want to not see inside the building. Now, again, I'm going to emphasize these are views that are saved in this project and that you can save in a template with different styles. Whatever views you find useful when you're working in a project, save them. So in other words, you try variations of different model view options and different graphic overrides and you say, that's what I want to see. Then just simply save a view or save a clone folder if it's something that relates to all plans or all sections or all elevations. That will allow you to just have that same style for all similar views. Now, we're looking at an axis. Actually, we'll just go back. Here's the white model version. Now, the thickness of these lines is based on, I think it is that's the graphic override. Let's see, is this here? The line pen 2. Okay, so this is what's currently active here. So all of these are black right now. I'm using a particular pen set that makes it all black, but we can make things different weights here. And so the different weights are showing up, and so we could make things thinner there. But let's look at a different variation, which is an AXO with hidden line. Now, you notice that there's a subtle difference here. It's not only that the line work is represented thinner. It's also actually analyzing it in more detail. It's using a more intense processing that is exactly the same as when you generate elevations or sections. So if you see funky lines on your elevations, you will see it in Analytic hidden line. You won't see it in renderings necessarily or in the other 3D viewing style there. Now, the trade-off is this is beautiful, or it's clean, and it's exactly what you would see in an elevation. When you're doing it in hidden line, we can do this with more detail. So what's the difference between those two views? It has to do with the model view option saying, do we want to simplify the doors and windows so they're just planes, or do we want to have more detail, etc. You know, so that's the model view options there. Now, this is an AXO view. Let me take one from the back here. It's a simple perspective. So this is a view where I placed a camera on the plan, moved around my viewpoint till I got it the way I wanted, and said, all right, that's a nice view, and I just saved that as a view in the view map. By the way, to save any view, if you were rotating around, like if I were to rotate this to a new position here and say, I like that, well, I can either right-click on this and say redefine with current window settings. So that would actually say, you know what, this is what I prefer. Or we can say that I'd like to save the current view. And then this is on my other screen here. So we can say that we want to save this view, and then we can give it a name, you know, a custom name here, whatever we want. That's how these were named. And it'll save all of the context, including the 3D positions. So when you have something, say, hey, this is a nice view, just save it, because then it's so easy just to have it at hand. there. Now I'm not going to add it here. I think we don't need that. And if I double click on this, it'll go back to the earlier viewing position. Now, one thing I wanted to point out is that the line work here, not only is it crisp, but we can copy this line work and manipulate this line work. So what does that mean? I can go to the marquee tool, which you should all be familiar with. It allows you to select an area, either rectangular or some other shape, and then do something with whatever you've outlined. In this case, I'm going to go in and draw a box over the whole thing. And when I say copy, in a 3D view, which is set to the vectorial line work, it'll basically, and does this come up on the other screen? Yeah, here it is. It's saying, how do you want to copy it? Now, scaled drawing is essentially the way we draw all the time. We're drawing in scale. Everything is, so many feet or meters long, etc., as opposed to a screenshot. Now, if I copy this and I say just copy the edges, and in fact, we don't have any shading, so there are no shades that we can do, and we don't have any shadows, we don't have any hatching. They're turned off. So I say OK. So what have I done? I've just, and by the way, you'll only get that dialog when you use the marquee in a 3D view. And if you were doing it in a normal, like colored view, it would probably just say screenshot. Do you want to copy that screenshot? Now that I've done that, if I go to, I'm going to go to a worksheet that has been set up for this purpose. So this is worksheets, and we'll go to sketch views. We see here's a view. It's actually just a slightly different angle. And you notice that it's somewhat sketchy here. Well, let me just zoom out a little bit, and you'll see there's a bunch of them here. Let me just paste in. So I just do Command V or Control V, and I'll just center the current view, keep the current view, and there. I'll just move this over. All right, I missed the top corner there. But now these are lines. So I can select the lines, and I can select all the lines if I want to, and say these lines I'd like to switch from just normal solid lines to where's the sketchy one? It's down here, sketch. All right, now I do that and we zoom in on it, we'll see everything. So it got a little sketchy there. Now, one thing that we can do is I can say I'd like to select certain lines like this. And let me just say, if I don't want these to be sketchy because they just sort of look a little bit funny, then we can say, you know what, we'll make these just a solid line. So now we can have a combination of some solid ones and some sketchy ones here. So that's a great way to create a sketchy view that you have control over. Now, if you wanted to overshoot here, you could manually do that. Let's just look at this. I can take this line and I can just stretch it, here, and take maybe this line here and stretch it. And maybe this one is a little too far, but all right. So now you can see that it's starting to have that slightly sketchy look. So, I'll just take a couple more here. And so this is just something that you can do. So how long would it take to go and do that? Well, it depends on how much you want to finesse it, but you could probably take 5 minutes and make just a little bit of that messy look with the corners that you want. So not automated, but certainly you have the freedom to do that. Now the line is sketchy. You notice that the blue line is straight because it is a vector. It's from here to here. It's just saying, while you're going from here to here, just waver a little bit. But the actual blue line, when I select it to stretch it, is actually a straight line here. So of course I can just pull it whatever amount offset I want there. All right, so that is something. Let me just get back on my notes here. So we've looked at white model versus analytic. So the analytic one in that 3D viewing styles allows you to copy line work and do things like that. We've looked at model view options to change the level of detail to make doors and windows simpler. We've looked at shadow on and off and the ground plane on and off. So those are things just can be very useful. Now let's move on to some wireframe layers and cutaways. These are ways of seeing through things in the building for various presentations and study purposes. Okay, so let's see. Lawrence Brills gave me, well, I don't know, he had a little firecracker and the thing, so I assume that the emojis are saying you like that. That's great. Scott says, I love all you've added to MasterTemplate 22 and the sample project. What should I be aware of when testing or changing settings so I do not inadvertently modify your excellent work? Well, the first thing you can do is to just work on a copy of the file. So if you take a copy of the sample project or duplicate it, you can do anything you like because you can always open up the original one and look at that. In general, what makes a template functional are the layers and layer combinations, the fills, all of the attributes, the fills, building materials, composites, etc. I would never delete a layer or a layer combination until you're really experienced. I would never delete any of the fills, building materials, composites until you're familiar. Although, you know, you can bring back, if you deleted a composite saying I'd never do a wall like that, you could always bring it back later if you needed. The view map, anything that you change there, there's no undo. So just be careful about that. If you do want to just get some things away saying, you know, there's a whole bunch of views here, God, it just goes endless and I don't want to have those, you can put them within another folder. You notice how I open and close those folders. And once they're closed, you know, they sort of are out of sight. You can even drag them into the folder at the very bottom that's called trash recycling. And it's basically saying, I don't want to delete this, I just want to get it out of the way. So you can do that. Same thing with the layout book. If you delete a layout, it's gone. If you want to hide it, maybe put it in a subset or a folder that is just not in view. But feel free to change anything you like in the template. If it's your own copy of the file, you can always compare it to the original one and recreate it if you need to, if you get it messed up. All right. Ricardo, hey Ricardo, can you set a layer combo once you've gotten the drawing to show just the layers you've displayed from the 3D document? Okay, so let's just talk a little bit here about best practices for layer combination. Let's see. All right, so I'm in ArchiCAD here. So if we were taking a 3D view, okay, so we're in, go to, here's just our simple 3D view here, and I say, you know what, I don't want to see the trees. Okay, so I go to the layer combination. Now, if I turned off the to building only, that's a layer combination that does certain things, but now we're not seeing the site as well. I can also do, I think I have one here, presentation, building and site, or no, presentation model, but no vegetation. So that's designed so you don't have the trees, but you do see the site. So there are layer combinations for a lot of things, but let's just say that you wanted to also turn off, you know, some other things. Maybe you don't want, I don't know, what would you not want here? So the layer, if I say, what layer is this on? This is on a layer called floor fixtures, railings, and lower cabinets. Now I've been thinking, and I want your feedback on this, Ricardo and everybody else. Railings and lower cabinets generally are shown at the same time. If you want to show just a partition plan, just where the walls are, you would turn them off. If you want to show fixtures, things that are fixed in the building, not furniture, then they both come on. But I'm thinking that, you know what, given how rich the railing tool is and it has a different function, that maybe I should break that up into two different layers for, you know, railings and lower cabinets. Let me know what your thoughts are. But let's say that we didn't want to have that on. I could go and let's say there is a nice little tool called the Quick Layers. Here's a little icon here, also available for window palettes, Quick Layers there. And the Quick Layers, I can say take what I've got selected and hide it there. And let's say that we didn't want the rafter tails, these guys here. So that is a rafter tail, and I'm going to hide that. So you can see how that's simplified things there. All right, so let's say that that was a style of view that you wanted, and I like this particular view. I can go literally and say save this view here, give it a name here, and we'll just say temp, like that. All right, it's now in here. All right, and I can go back to the original one here where you can see the railing and the rafter tails. I can go back to temp. Now, there's no problem with creating custom views like that. Just be aware that if you've modified the layers, so this layer is now say custom as opposed to being anything here, that it's going to be locked in. You can't say, you know what, when I have a layer, my layer combination for building and site, you know, I don't want to show, you know, the flowers or something. I don't know. You can choose certain things that you want to show or not show. So it's no longer linked to a layer combination, but it is a view that you can return to. And so you can do that. Of course, be careful. Don't create these arbitrarily and clean them out, because I've seen people say, God, I have a lot of views. I don't even know what these are for. You know, that can be a real mess there. I do have, though, in the template, the idea that if we go to temp 1 here, all right, so this is a cutaway. So this is literally a cutaway, and we're going to get into cutaways in a moment, with certain layers turned on, and it's saved that way. And here's another cutaway in a different position here. And these are intended to be like that. Now, what you can do is you can literally create a view and then say, you know what, let me just redefine this with the current Windows settings. So you could have a certain number of these that are just sort of there for today's session, let's say, and just redefine them to show the particular things that you want to work on. So that's something, you know, can be a best practice. I'm just going to get rid of this one here, just exit out. It'll say you can't undo it. I don't care. I don't need that one anymore. All right. Lawrence says, for the record, I haven't worked in AXO for years. Reason being, it's not how we see the real build, and ArchiCAD is beautiful working in 3D perspective. I think that's a personal choice, and I agree. It's great that ArchiCAD allows you to work in perspective, and I think that may even be a difference from Revit. At least I remember hearing that a long time ago, that you could not model in perspective. All right. Tom Leche, a way to extend a sketch line is to put a flat parallel arrowhead at each end. I like that. Let's just take a quick look at that. Thank you, Tom. So where do I have that? I have it in a worksheet, which is, here's the sketch views. And let's just take these lines. So I'm just going to select 3 lines here. Now lines, no arrowhead. If I say, give me arrowheads at both ends, well, there are these little bitty arrowheads there. Well, that's not really what he means. He means an arrowhead that's actually simplified. So let's just undo. Now I've got these lines still selected. When I undo, it shows the ones selected that I had worked on. And let's look at the arrowhead. Let me put it in, we'll just put it on arrowhead, and then let's look at the arrowhead style here. So we're going to say that this is going to be just a, where do we have just a straight extension? Okay, so this looks like it is a, I don't know, let me try that, straight extension here, and that's the width there. I'm not sure. Let's do, make it bigger. We can see it. Oh, that did some funny things there. What do we have? Do we have, you know, we can do certain things here. Little dots there. How did you, what do you mean an extension there? Tell me. Okay. Okay. So, all right. I want a way to put a flat parallel arrowhead at each end. So maybe you're meaning like this arrowhead, and we just make the arrowhead 0 width here, but I don't see how to extend it. How do you do that? Is there an option in the line tool to have that extension? I don't see it. Tom, can you send me an example of something so I don't waste any more time here? Interesting idea to see, what that would do. Okay, Scott says, I don't want to delete anything. I want to play around like you've been doing, but then make sure I can revert it back to your defaults. That's fine. Don't delete anything. Just play around. And, if you do it on your own copy, then you can always revert back by just comparing it. But a lot of things that you change, there may not be an undo command. So you have to be careful in the sense that if you change something in a view setting or in the model view options or anything, then it will change. Now, what I was doing here, I'm double clicking on a view, it restores things. If you don't redefine the view, but you simply select different model view options or overrides and just say, well, what does it look like if I switch? You're not destroying anything. You're simply saying, right now I want to turn this to a different setting, but you're not changing the view definition or the definitions of the styles. Okay, Ricardo says, why not just right click and hide the layer? Why did I use this selections layer? Because here's where we're going to go back to the 3D view here. So we're in the 3D view. Well, see this thing that says undo quick layer actions? All right, let's go back to the one. Here's a really important thing to at least understand. Here, if I select, let's say that I want to take off the roofs right now. So I'm going to select the roofs. Now I could right click and say layers, hide layer. Okay, now that the upper roofs are hidden, but there's nothing that says undo, like I want to put it back. I'd have to double click on the view. So I'll just double click on the view and show you that if instead I select this one and then I do hide this layer, and perhaps I say, oh, I guess these other roofs are on a different layer here, and I'm going to hide that. And then later you say, oh, and there's the ceiling. Let's, select that and hide. Okay, so now I'm seeing, cut through things. But then I can go undo and undo and undo. That's why quick layers is very useful. Okay. All right. How did I build the sill plate in that view? All right, so basically, I want to stay focused on graphic overrides and visual tricks, but in many cases, we're just going to do things with the beam tool. And in fact, I will be showing you some of the framing and some of the effects that you'll find useful with that. Okay. All right, so someone wrote, hey, sir, would you like to adjust the voice, please? I'm not sure what that means. Maybe you need to turn your volume up or down because no one else has mentioned that. Okay. All right, and Ricardo says, that's why I listen to you. Yeah, I guess I taught you something new today. Good. All right, where was I? Cutaways, I think, here. So we're looking at different viewing styles. We've got different saved views. So, I'll just say if we have in perspective, here's a view. These are all saved views based on cameras. Here, let's look at an interior view. So each of these is in just a different place, placing a camera. You should definitely get used to moving around, saving a view that you want to either show a client. So you have your meeting, you've already laid out your 5 or 10 or 20 places you want to go over with the client, save those views. Here's a bird's eye, and this, how did we get this perspective effect? If I'm going to I can place a camera, but I can also do it manually. If we go to view, 3D view options, 3D projection settings, and we can say we are up in the air, 53 feet, about, I don't know, 15 or 20 meters here, And where I'm looking down here is down at a lower point here. And basically when I just moved around in space, I came up with that view. And in fact, a quick tip for moving around in the view is, you press down the center mouse button, you can move left or right. That's panning, or up, up or down this way. If you press the shift key at the same time, we're in orbit, and I can rotate around to different viewing points. It's the same thing as using that orbit thing here, but it's just quicker. Center mouse button, press down, shift key gives you orbit in 3D, allows you to just reposition on the fly. Very convenient. All right, let's look at see-through walls. All right, so here's a view, similar type of view to what we had earlier, except that we're seeing through the walls. If I go to the layer dialog, we're going to see that the wall layers here have a little, are showing as a wireframe. If I click on this, I'm going to click on it once, and you can see how it highlights this, but it also becomes a more opaque looking shape. Click on it again, and you can see it's a wireframe. It's a very subtle change, but basically when you click on that, you can switch it one way or the other. Now, this is set in wireframe for this particular layer combination. So layer combinations will turn on or off different elements, but you can also switch the way that the elements are shown, and in this case, making some things wireframe. Now, one of the really nice things about this is that we are seeing the building here. We can move around to any viewing position, and we can literally say, oh, you know what, that cabinet, oh, I forgot to change that, and you can select it. I'm clicking right through the wall. So the wall is just a wire frame. It's just the line work, and it's empty, right? Now, that's great. I can go fix things, I can do various things. But if I go here to this one, this is a different viewing style. This is similar, but I can't select something in here. If I try to select this table, it's going to select the wall because the wall is actually solid. But guess what? It's made of glass. All right, how do I do that? Well, it is set with the model view, the graphic overrides, where I've got a rule activated that says see-through walls. The rule is set as if it's a wall, make it glass. All right. Now, I like it visually a lot. You can see that you can tell where the lines are, but you can see the doors and windows. It's a nice variation compared to this one. And I find this is sort of heavy, right? And this one is much lighter. Now, so those are, one is done with the wireframe layer, and the other is done with a graphic override, just with all the layers still showing normally here. Now, you notice we're seeing through all the walls. We're seeing, if we're zooming in here, I'll just rotate down, we're seeing into the kitchen there. That's the fridge. Those are the cabinets there. If I go to see-through exteriors, now we're not seeing into the kitchen. We're seeing the interior partitions. You can see the interior partitions showing. So how did that happen? Well, we have a slight variation. See-through exteriors, I'm saying, all right, well, in general, if something's a roof or a ceiling, we want to see through it, but the walls, only the exterior walls do I want to see through. The rule here is slightly different from see-through walls here. It says if it's a wall and it's on a particular layer. So basically, I'm just being more selective about the walls, but I'm also in this case saying show, see through the roofs, etc. So this is how you can set up some special combinations here. Now let's look at see-through walls, doors, and windows. I've got some things here. We'll say okay, and now you can see that this is actually making, a little different feel. We're seeing through the doors and windows. Just depends on what you want to show your client here. Now let's look at one model framing highlighted. So this has got a graphic override that's saying make all of the exterior of the building glass, or maybe it's airspace, I think, here. Also, it's got an override that says make them gray as opposed to black, so it's just simpler. And then for the framing elements, and I've only framed the lower section, but there are actually stacked elements here you can see underneath that. But those elements are actually overridden to have this sort of wood color. Whether they're made of wood or not, and whatever the color would be, they're highlighted. We could make them red, we could make them something else. So if we go into the see-through framing, it's see through all 3D elements. So it is this one's first, is saying anything that's 3D, make it see-through. But see the structural framing means highlight it, and the rule for structural is if it's on certain layers that are designated for that purpose, override this and just make it that. Now, again, we could make this red, we could make it something else here. That's just an option there. But we do need to have something there if we wanted to override there. Okay. Now here's a structural model. Now, it's not a true structural model, but it's pretty useful for study. We're now looking for the very first time at changing the model, the partial structure display, so the structure display of the model, to show only the core of load-bearing elements. Now, if I say, give me entire model, we're going to see, now we're seeing the roof shingles, etc. Here. If I go to without finishes, we'll see possibly something slightly different. If we were cutting through it, we'd actually see something different. These roofs are cheated. They're actually, the plywood section just has this being overridden with a surface that says make it shingles. So it's not actually a separate skin there. Core only here. And you know, there's some variations here that I'm not going to worry about, but the core only of load-bearing elements. So how does it know what's a load-bearing element? So if I look at the core only and I select what's going on with this, well, this is a beam. You know, it's got a certain profile here, and you know, we're seeing the core of the beam, but it doesn't support anything. It's not load-bearing. If I go into the settings for this, we'll see down in this section, it is a non-load-bearing element here. And if I go to core only of load-bearing elements, then it'll only show the ones that are load-bearing. And for example, if we had interior partitions that are not load-bearing and that was turned off, we wouldn't, you know, those would disappear. So this is something saved in this particular view, the partial structure display. You can also open this up and just sort of see these are the choices that we have. Can't really tweak it. It's just, is this element have the designation that it's load-bearing or not? And then if it's multiple skins, do we want to show all the skins or just the core or everything but the finish there? Now let's look at see-through roofs here. So this is, again, with a wireframe. We can see through it here, whereas see-through roofs with the graphic override has a slightly different visual effect, you know, and certainly for some presentations, you know, that might be preferred there. Here's another one that I've saved, which has just certain layers turned on, and here is a custom layer combination. So I didn't create a new layer combination because it was just something I wanted to create and be able to return to for presentation. And frankly, it's just sort of a concept idea where we're seeing certain things. SEO, so these are solid element operators. There are some elements here that are being used to cut off the rafter tails to make them a certain shape, which I'm not going to focus on. Let's look at now cutaways. And now there are two different ways that we can do cutaways in ArchiCAD. Let's say conceptually two different ways. One is with a marquee and the other is with cutting planes. And we've had both of them for a very long time, although the cutting planes got much more flexible in, I don't know, when it was version 18 or 20, somewhere in there, that the Graphisoft introduced this little icon here of the eyeball here. And you notice that this, when I hover over it, it allows me to cut. Let's see if we, okay, right click on this and say show cutting planes here. Show cutting planes. Zoom out. Where is it? Okay, let me get the cutting plane high. Oh, that's no cutting plane, that's right. So this has got a cutting plane. Now if I press down on this, you see that it's actually giving me an interactive cut, and I can finalize this at any point. And then I can move around here. And of course I could save a view and then return to it at any point, and it'll have that view. And in fact, here's a view that was saved with a cutting plane low, and this is cutting off at about, I think, the 4-foot level above the ground floor. Now, the cutting plane, you can see, is visible here. That's what this little line is showing. I can say, don't show the cutting planes. And now the cutting plane is still active, but I can't grab it. If I say, show the cutting plane, then I can grab it and move it. And we can create cutting planes at any angle. So here, for example, is one that's cutting off the front. And if I hover over this, we can see I can actually change that cut to, and let's just say, cut it to there, and then finalize it. Now we're seeing that. Now it's final just in the sense of right now, this is what we see, and we can rotate around. So any of these views we can just save and put onto a sheet, or just go to with a client saying, here, I want to show you how this is done, or with your builder, say, oh, we'll just cut through this here. So in the template, we've got a number of different ones for different angles, just for convenience. Hey, you can just quickly grab it, and then we can move that cutting plane around. And here's an extreme one where I've got it cut on all different sides, and you can just barely on screen see that there are these cutting planes in different directions that we can move. So it's got a top and 4 of the cardinal directions. Now, I'm just going to put it back to cutting plane none, and you can see we haven't modified the model. We've just simply said I don't want to cut anymore. Now, the cutaways are done with the marquee tool as opposed to cutting planes, and they have a similar effect, but they're not as interactive. So if I go to the floor plan here, and let's just go to the camera tool and change this to none, so the cameras disappear there. And here we have this model. Now this has got the last settings that I had in the floor plan, which were, I think, a schematic floor plan with certain layers. If I go and say, show this in, show it in 3D, we're going to see something funny because the plan didn't have the roofs turned on, and some certain other things were not turned on, and in fact the plan was in the schematic mode there. So we probably want to switch, if we go to the plan here, we probably want to switch to the layers that we'd want, let's say, for the model, so building and site, for example, here. And now it's going to be sort of a mess in the sense that we're seeing a whole bunch of things overlaid. We'd also want to switch to, instead of presentation, we'd want to look at, something that has more of the information here. And in fact, if I just go to, the simplest thing right now will be to just go give me a 3D view here and pick up the settings of this window, which has all the we're seeing all the detail. So if I right click on this and say pick up view settings, and then go to this and say inject view settings here. Now we're seeing things in, with all the right layers turned on. Now, if I go to the marquee tool and I draw a marquee, you can see the marquee is indicating an area on plan. And if I now go and say show the selection or the marquee in 3D, we're going to see this cutaway. Now this cutaway is great. It's very easy to get exactly what you want based on what you see on the plan, but it will, there can be it can be a little bit tricky when you're going back and forth between plan and you say, you know what, I want to see, you know, a little bit more. It's just it can be a little bit messy to do that there, and then use the keyboard shortcut to jump back to 3D. Now we're seeing, you know, a little bit more. Now, one of the things that we can do is use the marquee to set the boundaries and then adjust the layers in the 3D window. So if I go back to just the schematic, well, actually, let's go to our first floor plan. So this is our construction document plan. So it's got all of the structural elements, including cabinets, etc., showing. Now, if I go and pick the marquee and say I want to do an irregular shape, and I'll just sort of do something arbitrary like this, and then go to 3D, we're now going to see, you know, that cutaway, and then I can easily certainly switch to the model like this, and now we're seeing all of the model elements. Sort of rather odd, obviously, what I cut out here. But let's look at the difference between the cutaway, where we have a natural view. So here's one that's saved. It makes a little bit more sense here. And of course, when we zoom in, we can say, all right, this is insulated. This wall is insulated. This is just being represented as framing, even though it's not all totally solid. It's just showing as wood here. But if I go to cutaway red, now we've got a view where we can see what's cut away. And just to highlight what's the natural end of elements versus what's cut away, that can be useful. This is done under the view menu, elements in 3D view, filter and cut elements in 3D. And the important thing here is cut elements. We're cutting it with either a cutting plane or a cutaway marquee. And in this case, I'm saying make it red. We could make it any color, as opposed to use element attributes, which is what we had a moment ago where we were seeing that. So each of these views is just saved there. Now let's go to a cutaway marquee that is a specific view of some framing. And let's start to look at the framing and some of the visual tricks that I managed to work out in the template that you can do in your own project, or if you have MasterTemplate, it's built in. So when we're looking at these elements here, we're seeing the X here and here. Now I'm looking at this, I guess if this were blocking, then we'd want to represent it differently, but I guess this is just a cutaway, so it is actually going a long way. It's just stopping there. Now, you notice how clean and crisp everything is. I want to point out one thing that I've done and haven't mentioned earlier is if we were to be using the normal pens, let's see, interesting. Okay, if we were to go to where is this? View pens. Okay, that's interesting. I'm just going to go back to just our overview here. So you can see how the line work here is all black and the edges of the roofs are black. That's because I've switched the pen set to make that crisp. I make all of the outlines black or gray, as opposed to when we're using the view pens, which we are conventionally on plan, are in color. When I select that, you can see that now we have some sort of odd looking things. You can see this sort of reddish line. These are sort of blue here. You know, depending upon your view, this may or may not, you know, be an issue. But I've tended to find this type of outline here just a little bit less crisp, and it's sort of odd. Why is that red, you know, there? And so this is an option, is to have a pen set that makes it just nice and crisp. This is particularly important if you're just doing line work things and not having the colored surfaces there. So if we look at the pen sets here, you notice that this is black except for a few here compared to the view pens that are similar. So if you wanted to ever create this yourself, if you didn't have this, you could go and make a change. I'm just going to select all of these here and make them black. You can see how they all went black. I could do this for all of them or in groups. It's now custom, and then you can store it with whatever your name is, like first row black or something like that, and then it becomes available as a pen set. And by doing it just with the color, I'm keeping the weights the same. So if we were to draw something or have a drawing, thick lines would remain thick, etc. So let's go back to the cutaways here. All right, so I'm not going to be able to cover everything because we're already at the 90-minute mark, and I want to finish up in the next half an hour here. And let's see. Let me look at some comments before we go on to framing, because framing is going to be the next part of this. Okay, Luis says, always learning with you. Your tutorials are the best in all of YouTube. Keep up the good work. Thank you. Appreciate it. Eric, on the interior view, what were your graphic settings to get the bright walls? That's a good question. I think that's worthy of study. So let me take that in a minute. Let's see, Luis says, can I send you an email about terrain modeling? Okay, I've been having troubles. Yep, send it to support@bobrow.com. I do prioritize people who are in my ArchiCAD coaching program. So if you're not in the coaching program, it may take me a while to get back to you. In the coaching program, I actually take projects and open it up on screen in a group session. We have 2 sessions each month, and I we'll actually show you how things are done and send you back a file that's got some revisions. Ken Brooks, see-through walls with gray lines. So I'm not sure, that was one of the views a few minutes ago, used a graphic override saying make sure that the walls are glass or airspace, and then the graphic override also said make those walls have gray lines, or maybe it was all 3D elements were gray. So the graphic override changed the pen to a different pen number. And Jeffrey says, how can I use graphic overrides different materials of windows? For example, I want to override the window frame with material A and the glass with material B. I'm not sure that you can use graphic overrides for that. Graphic overrides seem to affect elements as a whole, like the entire wall or the entire window. But I was trying to make, for example, the framing of the wall and the stucco see-through, but still have the framing, like the plate, top and bottom plates, be opaque, and I couldn't make it happen. So I don't think you can do that. Scott says, the exclamation point in the view tab indicates that changes have been made from the previously saved view. That's correct. To revert back to it, you can double click on the tab, or you can double click on the view in the view map in the sidebar there. So I'm not sure. So Scott, we'll have to deal with that. You're asking some detailed questions about the template. All right, so I do want to get to that interior view. Cut surface display. Is there a way to set use element attributes as a default for cut surface display? Here's how it works. When you go to 3D, it remembers whatever was the last settings, or were the last settings you had. So let me just go simply here. Here is AXO overall here. Where's the sun coming from? Well, it's wherever that was saved. If I go rear with sun, sun's coming from a different angle. Where was that set? That was set under the 3D view options, 3D projection settings. Here's the sun. I can rotate the sun around. We'll just see what happens when I do that. See how the sun changes here. Now, in the same way, when I go to the cutaway here for the marquee, or actually, no, here's the cutaway AXO with the natural. this view has saved the cut elements, use element attributes, and the other view had it with red. Okay, so if you have one view that has your 3D model in the style that you want, including if you were to ever cut it, that it uses the element attributes. You double click on that view, you're now in 3D. Now you do a cutaway. The cutaway has the natural element attributes. So just make sure you have at least one view with that and then double click it. And you'll notice here I have lots of views, each one with different options. And so it just makes it quick to say, this is the style I want. Now I want to look from over here. Now I want to change the layers. Now I want to do something else. Okay. Peter Spellman, ever had a problem with a thin roof not casting a shadow? Not sure. Can't remember that. Luis says, I'm not on your training program, but I'll fix that in no time. Excellent. Just email me if you want some advice about what to, what would be the most appropriate. support@bobrow.com. All right. Ricardo Yaton says, let everyone know there's no better way to get good at ArchiCAD than Eric's coaching. If you need to make dollars with ArchiCAD, this is how. And he has with exclamation marks on a few of them. So thank you. Really appreciate your feedback. Okay. Scott says, suggestion on ideal photo rendering settings for sample plane animations. Okay, we're not going to get into photo renderings today. It's a complex topic. Just use the simple one in terms of photo rendering settings. Just a very quick thing. If you're going to document creative imaging, photo render projection, it will use the photo rendering settings that were last set up and the photo rendering settings. Here, you notice these are built into ArchiCAD, although there's some, these are from Andreas Lettner. These are ones that were from his CineRender course that I've carried forward. But you see general purpose balanced or outdoor here. All out, here's an outdoor low quality, outdoor basic physical. Play around with these. In fact, there's more. If I say see more, we can see in photorealistic scenes, outdoor, daylight. So these are all ones that were standard with Graphisoft's ArchiCAD 22 template that I brought in. And so you could do outdoor, daylight, basic, here, try doing that. So there are just a lot of different options. Play around with it till you get something that works pretty quickly and that you can then experiment with. And I think anytime you use one, it will show up in the recent ones. These are, what do you call it? These are the recent ones, I believe, here. Okay, getting to the question from Rich Matthews on the interior view. How did I do this? This was something interesting. Go to, let's see, so we're in 3D views, and I have an interior view here. All right. This view looks pretty nice, I would say. I mean, the design, you could say it's, it's not the type that you would do, maybe it's just all wrong for you, but it's nice and bright. You can see it. Let's look at some settings here. So what's going on with this wall? What color is it? All right, it's generic interior. So when you're looking at the surfaces, you can say it's made out of stucco, or it's made out of brick, or it's made out of stone, or you can give it a color, like color, red or white or whatever. So generic interior is just sort of the starting point in this model. And in fact, in many cases, you can just leave it on generic interior saying the walls generally are white, there, and then later change certain accent walls there. Now, they're very bright compared to the way, if you use generic interior from the Graphisoft standard template, you'll find that it's much different. I went in the master template, and you can do this yourself in your own template or project. You can go to the options, surfaces, and here's, we'll do generic interior. And see how bright this looks? As opposed to, let's just look at color white. See how much color white is a little darker here. Check out the emission color. The emission color here is at this level. So what is emission? It basically simulates light coming through the surface. If I go to, what is it, generic interior, and I go to emission color, you can see that it's actually, so it's not the emission. I forgot about that. I didn't change that. What it is the ambient and diffuse settings. Notice this is 93 and 75. It's reflecting a heck of a lot of light. If I turn this down, you'll see how much darker this gets here. Now, if I'll cancel this in a minute, but if I go back to white, see 30 and 35. So if I made this wall white, I'm just going to select these two walls, and I'll say that I'd like to make them, instead of interior, I'd like to make them white, and we'll just do this. All right. And look at how much darker that is. So that's white. And whereas my generic interior is set up to be brighter. Now, I patterned that to some extent on the white ceiling, but I think I made some changes. So there is a color white ceiling, which is specifically designed to be a bright, and that's, so that it normally doesn't have light on it, but just to cheat, you can make it brighter. So if I say they're white ceiling, you can see how it's much wider. So it may be identical. I can't remember now, or whether I changed it, and I don't want to bother with that. Let me just undo those last two changes, because I don't want to mess up this model here. But that's a key thing. It has to do with that. Now, I also think, if I undo back here one more step, there we go. All right, I also think that in my settings for the camera, or the 3D view options here, so 3D projection settings, so we're looking here, it's a little hard to tell, but there's a viewpoint here. We're in the corner of the building looking this way. Here, you notice it says sunlight, and the sunlight, this may not have actually changed. This is 100% sunlight and 80% ambient. I definitely looked at adjusting sunlight settings in order to get this brighter. But that's a key thing. So I just made that there. I can't remember now if there's anything else that I did to make the whole thing brighter, but certainly making the walls have just a lot more reflection off the light just made a huge difference in terms of, instead of it looking dreary, it looks, pretty bright. All right. Okay, Jeff says, I want to show wall A and wall B with two different shadows. How can I do that? I don't know what you mean by two different shadows. So you'd have to be clearer. If you have shadows showing, they have to be cast from the same light source, or from whatever is the existing light source. Now, if you're doing a rendering, you can have multiple light sources. So you can have spotlights and other directional lights, and then you can have shadows cast off of those. So maybe that's what you need to do. You won't see it in the OpenGL 3D window that we're looking at. And in fact, I turned off shadows here in this view, because in the inside, most things would be in shadow, and you just have maybe, if you're lucky, some light coming through a window. So generally not too useful. So that's a saved view with lighting set a certain way, no shadows, etc. Okay. All right. Okay. So Scott says, what camera do I use to navigate in and out of a model in 3D? Now we're getting into more stuff. Let's deal with that in the coaching call. Okay. All right. Because I want to, where was I at? Oh, framing. This is a really important part of, as far as I'm concerned, getting good drawings from your model. So let's take a look at a section here. Okay, so here's a section. It's actually a staggered section. You can see this dashed line down the center. It's staggered maybe just as an example. It could have been done non-staggered. Let's go to the floor plan and we'll see, let's see, floor plan here. And we'll see, let's turn off the cameras and we'll get rid of the marquee here. All right, so you can see this is the section B going down across there. Now I drew a marquee following that shape and I saved that here. So if we compare section B here, and we'll just zoom in a little bit so it's similar scale with this cutaway, you see it's the same, but since it's a cutaway and it's in 3D, I can rotate around that and really study it. Now, if you are drawing things in 2D in a section, then they won't show up in the model. So you can see that there's some joists here that are showing up, and if I hover over it, you'll see that it's extending into the building and actually beyond the cutting plane there. If I zoom in on it, you'll see that the X that I was mentioning earlier. And let's look at the section here. And let's look at the X here. All right, now right now we're looking at this in a hairline view, which is certainly convenient. You can really see what's going on, but when you output it, you may find that that doesn't read as well as you'd like. So we can switch to true line weight, and I have a keyboard shortcut by the way there. That's under the view, on-screen view options, true line weight, and I've set one that has 3 keys, Command, Option, Control next to each other, and T for true line weight. And if you want to have quick access to these keyboard shortcuts, you can go to the options, work environment, keyboard shortcuts, and in that section you can pick any menu command and you can say I'd like to create a shortcut for it, and it's definitely convenient. So now you can see the framing here, and I was a little embarrassed after a presentation I gave a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks ago, because I had the framing like this, but I had the X with the heavy lines and the outline lighter. And to my naive eye, I thought that really looked good. But I can't remember who it was who was polite enough to set me straight and say, architectural graphic standards, the outline of something you cut through is what you want to show with a heavy border, not the interior X, etc. So I made it heavier. Now, should it be the same weight as this one? I don't know. I found if I made it the same weight here, it just became sort of really muddy. So I compromised a little bit there. But how did this get here? What is this element? Well, it's a beam. All right. Now, beams can be simple volumes like this here. Oop, that beam, when I changed it to it, it actually reverted to the setting that has lower priority. It's just a wood piece that is actually disappeared because it's lower priority. I'm going to undo this. When things intersect each other, they can, ArchiCAD will say, the stronger one wins or passes through the other one. All right, now let's look at this. This is a complex profile. So if I'm going to say selected, say edit, selected composite or profile, and we'll see it is one of the ones that I've set up in MasterTemplate for framing. So here you see the X. Now, is this a line and another line? No. This is a triangle, another triangle, and another triangle. So there are 4 triangles. Now, for a long time, ArchiCAD has had the ability in a complex profile to put different things. You can have something steel next to something wood, and or concrete. You can have the stem wall with a wood framing member on top, things like that. So each part can have its own fill, can be made of a different building material if it's appropriate. Up until maybe last year, if you had two elements that had the same building material, like both of them concrete, ArchiCAD would remove the line between them and say, yeah, you poured concrete, the whole thing is there. And even if you had two elements stacked on top of each other, if they had the same building material, it would say, let's remove the line. Most of the time that's great because you can stack two walls and the surface, it will remove the line if they're both the same paint or the same surface. And if you're stacking them in section, you won't see a line. They're just going to be continuous if they have the same building material. In maybe version 21, I don't know when they changed it, you can now make 4 of these triangles here with the same thing. You notice it says wood framing, and I hover over that and it says fill pattern is wood framing. So I can have these two and they will show a line here. They have to be separate pieces, but they will show a line. However, you notice here it says wood framing 2. Now, if I had them all wood framing, then if you cut through it, you'd see the X. But if you put 2 of them side by side, if you were doubling something or 2 on top of each other, you wouldn't see the line where one met the next one. It would say, you know what? These are the same wood. Remove the line. I found that if I made these two one wood framing and these two a similar and actually duplicated but with a new name, different one for wood framing 2, that then if I put them side by side, the left one and the left one, this would, one of them would be number 1, one would be number 2, and it would draw the line. And you could stack them on top of each other because this is always the bottom, even if you make it horizontal and you stretch it to make it, a 2x8 or whatever it is for a plate, 2x6. When you stack the lower one on top of this one, it worked. So aside from maybe the possibility of something needing to be mirrored because and you accidentally have the same surface next to each other, this works beautifully. So this is the trick that I came up with here, and it works for the cutaways. Now, if you're wanting to have framing members that stop, like one stops and butts into the other, and here's where we go into the cutaway that I was showing earlier. Let's see, cutaway, where is it? See-through and framing. Oh, now I'm getting tired here. Set cutaway marquee. Okay, this one here. All right. So how does this one stop relative to that one? Okay. It actually, there is a line here. It's actually, even though it's connecting here to the same, to the reference line, we get a clean line. If we didn't have that, if they weren't separate, we'd see this sort of effect. Now, maybe you want to show the miter here or something like that, or maybe you'd want to show that this one goes straight and that one butts into it. I didn't bother with that. I wanted to show the simple case here, which is that some elements are going to just stop. And of course, you may have joist hangers and other stuff in there, but how do you get it to stop? Well, this one is done with framing general here. And this one is done with framing general 2. So what is that? Let's just open that one up. If I say, let's open framing general 2 here. Looks exactly the same, except that when I hover over this, you see it says wood framing 3, 3, 4, and 4. Okay, so what's the difference between them? If I go to the building materials and I sort by priority here, we go down to the wood framing 541, wood framing 2, 542, wood framing 3, 543. So the ones that are made with wood framing 3 and 4 are just slightly stronger. So if we do something, with one structural member using the basic wood framing and then the other one with the secondary one, then one of them is going to be stronger than the other and it'll stop. So that's a nice clean result there. Now you notice that we have wood framing 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are for those two. And then I also have wood structural with 1, 2, 3, 4 for things like, if we go back to that marquee here, I believe that this one is set just for framing general, but I was experimenting and I have put in ones that are using a different building material for structural. We may not technically need that, but it does give you some more flexibility for stacking things, having more variations, but they're all very much the same. Another little trick here that I had to work out is if you wanted to go to, if we look at the difference between wood framing here and wood framing 2, you may notice that in addition to there being a slightly different number here, there's a different surface material. So you can see that this is a surface and I have surfaces like this. Now they're actually using the same settings. I've just created a new surface for each one of them because it turned out that I can't remember now, but in a section, it would look at the building materials, but in a 3D view, it would look at the surfaces. Maybe if it wasn't cut, I'm not sure. Or even if it was cut, I think if you're looking in 3D to see the X, they had to be different surfaces. So by having different building materials, each with its own surface, I did that. And how did I create those? And in fact, how do I create any of these? I just select one of them. I say new. I say, give me a duplicate of it. Give me a new name, let's say 5 or something like that. And then make a change in it, but it'll start out being exactly the same. If I go to the surfaces, I did the same thing here. Went to option surfaces, and we had wood framing. And when I wanted to create the other ones, I said new, duplicate it, and I just gave it wood framing 2, etc. And it's exactly the same, except that it used. Now, if we look at this is wood framing pine grain GS, and we go to wood framing 2. Here's actually a slightly different texture. I think I actually did find that I had to have a different texture map here. So it got a little bit tricky, but basically, and here's GS and GS. So maybe I'm not sure whether I needed the different textures between 3 and 4, may not, but ultimately I definitely needed different surfaces to associate with this. Now, let's look at something to do with level of detail. Now, remember back in the beginning of the presentation, if you can remember back 2 hours ago, I had schematic and sketchy stuff here. Well, let's look at level of detail in terms of sections here. So I'm going to go back to the section here. So this is a 3D element, and it shows up in the 3D cutaway. I didn't bother doing the framing here. Now, maybe the floor joists are going the other way, but this element here is, let's just close the profile manager. It's an object. So it's an object that's in the standard US library. I imagine there's something in the international library that's similar. In the US library, when we choose something, we're choosing standard US sizes, 2x4, 2x6, 2x10, 4x, etc. here. And if I change this to another size, we'll see it just changes the proportions. We also have the option, is it single or double here. And we also have the option, I guess if it's a single, then you have the option, is it continuous or blocking here. Let's just make this a little bit easier to see. So we have the blocking. here, or we have a finish with, you know, the what is representing a wood grain just visually. Now I'm going to cancel out of this, and we'll just see that this is purely 2D, just laid in on top. And up in this section here, we have a double, we have a single. These are just objects. They're 2D, and this is 2D as well. Now it turns out that you can get exactly the same effects by just varying the profile. So here's what I've got in here. I'm just going to actually do something real quick and dirty here. I'm going to take this element and I'll drag a copy up to here. So I just use the drag with the Option or Alt key to get a copy. So now this one still is there, but this is a 3D element. Now it's probably sticking out through the building in the wrong way, but we'll just get it here. So I'm just going to go, and this is a profile, and I can go, let me just drag it to next to here. And then if I go here, I think I can go and say I want to make it wider. Now it's going to get wider from the center, so it's going to be, in fact, that I lost control over it there. But let's just say I take this, the nominal width is 3.5 here. And I'll just drag this so that the corner, so it's locked in at the center. So when I made it wider, it went both ways. And if I go down here, I can say I want to make it taller or shorter, and then snap this into, you know, that here. So now that is 3D. And if I go back to that cutaway, actually, let's go to the cutaway. That's the section B here. Where is it? Cutaway section B. We're going to see that now we have this thing right here. And in fact, I could drag that here in this 3D. Actually, I guess I have to be in a slightly angled view to drag it. I can drag it from this corner to here. And now we have the framing. Now, the length of it, where it stops and starts, you know, would need to be adjusted because I don't know that it's in the right place up here. But you can see that it looks perfect. Now, this is a wall. And the wall, if I go to its settings, is set to have the 4 triangles the same way here, and that's what's giving the framing. Now a little tip here is, you notice this dashed line, if we were to stretch the wall, make it taller or shorter, this single plate at the bottom is just going to stay undisturbed. It's going to be a 2x4 or 2x6, I guess, whatever it is there. And at the same thing at the top, it's got a double plate, and basically this is the line that is for the height stretch here. And this line can be dragged around. We can move it to a different position. We just don't want it to be above here. If we put it up here, then when we made the wall taller, these would deform. So this is, this line here is visually the stretch modifiers. Turn this off or on here. And if we said we don't want it to be able to stretch, we can say, no, it's a fixed height, or we turn this on and then it actually, now it's lost track of where it was there. So I'll close this without saving the changes. But basically this framing will show up just fine. I'm going to close this and don't save the changes here. All right, now let's look at up in this area. We have the wall framing here, and we don't have, this is just a volume. This is a roof volume across here. But if we did want to have that framing and all of this detail, we can just drag these things into position. So let's take a look at that. So I'm just going to go to the section. You could do it in the 3D view as well, but the section probably is simpler. Let's just, for the heck of it, just take this. That's the 2D element. I'm just going to delete it here, and you see now we have the one behind it there. Actually, let me just undo that. I want to keep that there for now. Let me just select the beam, and we'll just drag a copy of it here. And I'm just going to put it up in this general area. And now I'm going to switch it from the framing general to framing blocking here. And you notice that it went to the nominal size, the 2x4 size that I was set. But of course, I can go and make this taller or shorter here. Just take it up there, whatever that size is, and then I can, drag it into position. And if we just go into 3D now, into that 3D cutaway, we're going to see this is a true 3D element. And of course, I could use solid element operations to carve it out there. And of course, it really should be probably over here or something like that. So that's what I'm doing. And then look at the final touch here, the one that is the rotated one. And again, I'll go to the section here. And you can see this is now totally overlaid, right? So this is the object. Use the tab key to select the beam. I'm just going to drag a copy of it to here. So I've now got a new copy. What is the angle on this one? This is 18.43, and I think for my previous ones, I think I need to put in this rotation as a minus 18.43. It'll rotate there. Now I'll leave it beside it for a moment, or maybe I'll just drag it over to here, and then we'll stretch this down to whatever it needs to be here in terms of length. But now I'm going to switch it from framing blocking to framing finish. Okay. So how did I get this? It was one thing to have X's and a straight line. How did I get that? Well, if we look at this and edit this composite or profile, you notice it looks just like we had here. This is one fill. This is another fill. This is another one, etc. So each one of these is a fill, and ArchiCAD is happy to draw lines in between them. So if you like that, I don't know if you'd like that necessarily, but it is something that you can do. And if you have MasterTemplate, it's built in. Now, what about in the 3D, or what about in the section in terms of the line work there? Each one of these ones here has a setting for the contour pen, in other words, the outline pen. And I've got it set for 142, which is a sort of fairly fine line there. But I've got the edge, all of the exposed edges here, set with a different setting here that says 144, which is much thicker here. And that's my standard that I'm using in these framing elements, is 142 for the moderate ones and 144 for the heavy ones. And so I went through for each one of these, and I just went the top and the side, this side and top, etc., and just did that for all of the ones. It took a few minutes, but I can use this in any size. I can squish and stretch it any size that I want. And now let's look at that section. And remember, I just did this. And look, here's the thin line, thick line. There, if I turn off line weights, we'll see what we've got. But if I turn back on the line weights, we can see that. So there you have some stuff with framing and sections there. And let's see what questions we have. Suarez says, how can we get a 3D plan in ArchiCAD? Okay, there is something more. We're going to keep going. If you have to go, that's fine. But I do have a little bit more to share with you about doing a site plan a 3D, well, get some shadows on the site plan, because that's a pretty cool thing. Maybe that's part of what you mean by a 3D plan. Joe says that hint about the wall surface color for interior views is fantastic. Thank you. Glad. All right. Jalat says, I just alternate the 1 and the 2. That's fine. I think as long as you have a system, you can do that. Rich says, hey, Eric, not very BIM using 2D objects. Well, I like to show both options in the sample project. So if you find it simpler and quicker to just put in some framing and just repeat it as 2D, and you're going to get some drawings out the door, fine. If you want to model it in 3D and repeat, and then make sure you trim and everything fits together, great. I do prefer 3D, Rich, believe me, but I know that not all users are able to have the time and focus to generate it all in 3D. So Paul says, another great tutorial, thanks much. He asks about the MasterTemplate international version. Does it include typical UK walls, floors, roof composites, or can we import these from our current template? We did when we created MasterTemplate years ago for international users. We researched UK, Australian, and South African standards, and we put in a whole bunch of different wall, floor, and roof types based on metric measurements. And so you'll find probably most of the stuff you need built in. However, you can easily bring in stuff or just vary it, so yes, that is there. Okay, Glenn says there's so much great information here today. Is there a link to replay the webinar? When it's posted, you'll find it on the ArchiCAD user website, so archicaduser.com. You'll also find it in my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Eric Bobrow. Okay, Chris Graver, thanks. Another great session. Susan says I have to go, but we'll check out the site information later. Tim says, will you make a video for this webinar available so I can watch the hour I missed? Yes, definitely. Okay, so I have one more thing. Let me actually see. Trying to fit in a ton here, right? Okay, we've done a whole bunch of these things. So here was the detailed modeling. Simple solution with 4 triangles, modifying it to make a heavier outline on things, figuring out how to do it when elements touch, doing multiple surfaces that would work, building material priorities so that you can have things stop instead of joining there, framing variations for blocking and trim, I did that. Integration of framing into the wall profiles, I showed you that. And now development from schematic through detailed designs, the Eve profile example, and then we're going to do a little sun study. We already did the vectorial 3D line work, so sun study to get a site plan that has shadows on it that are generated automatically by the program. So 2 things left, the Eve profile and the sun study shadows. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to get rid of these guys here. Let's see, I'm just going to get rid of this 3D. I want to put this back where the sample project doesn't have that. All right, I guess I instead of dragging a copy, I just dragged it. Okay, so there's that. And I'll get rid of this. This is the object. Okay, so maybe I moved that there. All right, so here's our section with the combination of 2D and 3D. Notice this Eve detail. This is a composite profile with all the same stuff here, as well as this. Now I don't know exactly how you'd want to represent this. This underneath the roof, we have multiple pieces, tongue and groove, and I didn't bother getting into the tongue and groove, but we could certainly represent that if we wanted, but just compare it to the Eve profile, the original one here that I had, which is the same except that I had just some cross members there, and so that was a first representation. So you could create that Eve detail with just simple beams that don't have any X's or anything like that, and rotate it and just get it there. And then you could replace it with the individually, sort of each piece with a framing member, like a composite, a complex profile. And you can then swap it in later and have more detail here. So if we were going to do tongue and groove, we could create that whole shape there. So it depends on what you need. And I'll just show you back in the section. So this one I replaced with the somewhat more detailed thing. Do I have one over? Not there. Let's go to a different section here. And this one is the earlier version with the X's in here. And it's not been trimmed out. We can do some solid element operations, but that is a 3D thing. And then, of course, the original one that I had up in the top section was all 2D. So you can do it in a variety of ways, and you can do individual members like that, or you can actually just create the whole piece that's going to go there. So that's sort of progressive refinement. Now, if we just go back a moment, remember I showed you some schematic level sections and elevations here. So let's go back to the ones and sketchy ones, right? So let's take a sketch section here, and this is section A. So we'll go to A here. Ooh, a little bit too sketchy here. Let's just go to presentation schematic here. All right. Now, I mean, there's some things there that are maybe a little bit odd in terms of the cleanup, but how did this is not a simple model. This model has a fair amount of detail. How did I dumb it down to here? So now we've looked at the whole thing. Let's come back to where you just want to say, here, I just want to show you how we've got this arranged over here, and you don't want to have all the detail, maybe. Well, first of all, model schematic is a layer combination. I just added this into the sample project, and I'm going to add it into MasterTemplate. But essentially, in model schematic, compared to the other ones, I turned off some of the framing stuff, so we can see S-beams and framing and columns. All of these structural things are turned off, whereas when I had building, building only, they're turned on. So in the schematic, when I turned those off, I also turned off some things for solid element or modeling elements that are like moldings and things like that. So this one that says modeling elements visible, and here, these ones are visible here. So basically, I turned off some of the detail in terms of layers. And then I also had the model view options, in this case, saying, show these things very simple, and the graphic overrides. Actually, this is here the graphic overrides. I said, turn off the shadows and shading, make everything white, etc. So that's the combination. And in this case, if I do it with the sketchy settings, from a distance, if you did a screenshot, this communicates pretty well. If you zoom in on it, you may say, ooh, look at that. But here's another interesting thing. If we look at the line work here, just zoom in here. Come on now. Okay, so this line work, yeah, it's pretty darn sketchy here. I do have different variations of sketch lines. So here's sketchy lines here. This particular override doesn't turn off the colors. This one has a different line type. So you notice how the sketch lines are, not quite as extreme here. If I go in here, this is sketchy lines 2, which says use sketch 2, and this is one of the variations of the sketch line work here. So how did I create that? Again, similar to many of the other variations. I went to options lines. I went to sketch. Here is a little wavery shape. It says make it a certain distance on paper. And I said, give me a new one that's a duplicate. And in the duplicate, if I switch it back to the sketch 2 here, you see those wavers are just in a smaller area. And if I go to sketch 3, the wavers are in a longer area. So sketch 3 is going to have a different feel than sketch 2. So, you know, you can experiment with that, but basically, if I go to my presentation elevation sketchy, it's using the main sketch line. And, you know, if I said, you know what, I'd prefer to have it not quite as sketchy, we could just update that by saying sketchy lines, remove that one here. And then I could say add in sketchy lines 2, you know, remove this one, add that one in there. So that would give me a different effect. All right, so I have one last thing. And for those of you who are still on, and we have 71 people on right now, I won't say this is the most dramatic demonstration, but it's a cool thing. And I think you'll appreciate if you take the next 5 minutes with me to watch it. All right. Let us see. So what are we going to do here? If I go to my presentation plans. Okay, so what is the presentation site plan here? All right, so some other variations that are cool. I mean, there are more things in MasterTemplate that you can do in general with ArchiCAD than I've shown, but this is pretty interesting. So this is one type of a site plan where we've got some colors and things, and I would say it's frankly a bit of a mess because we probably wouldn't want to put the layer for the finished floors on here. But if we look at the presentation floor plan, this is sort of cool, I think. You can see that this is a view that is showing some fills. I go over this, that's the slab. This is the structural slab. Let me just hover over this and tab through it. This is the fill that is an image fill. So if I drag this over, so what is this? This is a fill that is, it's a graphic fill, graphic as opposed to a cut or cover fill, and it's using one of those image fills that's based on a picture map. And so you can create as many of those as you need, and you'll see that here we have, you know, some carpet, some tile, and some wood. So that's one type of a floor plan. If we go to the presentation sections, we're going to see sections with the colors turned on. Or if we go to presentation elevations, we're going to see elevations with the colors turned on. So those, again, reminding you, these are done with using the settings that are in the marker, saying, hey, generate it with color, give me some shadows, give me some line work, and it's not overridden, whereas the construction document variations are overridden there. Now, we also have things for interior elevation, and there's some things for renderings. Now, the renderings, I think, go beyond what I have patience to try to go into, and there's not a whole lot of detail in here, but I want to show you the site plan. Now, where do I have this? Site plan, where do I have that? Sun studies here. Okay, so here are some sun studies. So this is a view from top down. Now, by the way, how do you get a view exactly top down? You go to 3D view options, 3D projection settings, and you make sure you're in a parallel view as opposed to perspective, where you're going to be looking at an angle here. And in the 3D projection settings, you can look in an isometric or some other predefined ones here, or in this case, we're taking a top view. You can see it says the word top view. Then I can say, where do I want the sun? And I can either put it arbitrarily here. Actually, that's the camera, 270, but the sun can be based on the date and time. Now, it looks like this is not literally based on date and time. It should be if we're calling this a 9 a.m. March 21st. So if you click on that, you can then go and say what date and time. And if you set your location for the project, it will generate the view for that. But for demonstration purposes, I've just got a sort of an arbitrary position here. So this is a view that is just generated in the normal 3D window. In fact, if I rotate, you can see that it's just a normal 3D view. Here's another view here. Notice the shadows are in a different direction because they are, what do you call it? The sun was set manually to just a different orientation. Now this is a different type of view, this one, sun study, to copy shadows. Now it'll take a second or two longer to generate. Notice it doesn't have the textures there because it is set under the 3D styles to simple shading with shadows vectorial. So if I look at 3D styles, these upper ones are line work and polygon shading. The lower ones are OpenGL done with your computer's graphics card. This one, remember, we were able to copy the line work to make a sketch view. Similarly, we can copy the shadows to create a shadowed view. Okay, now, you may not see it here, but this is set for a layer combination for presentation model, no 3D vegetation. So it's basically turning off the trees there, and it's as a presentation model, it's got a simplified, certain things are turned off for that. Now, whether that's the exact right layer combination or not, I'm not sure, but I've also got it as presentation here. Let's see, this actually, we should probably, something I have to double check. Let me just see if we did, but we'll leave that one there. Let me go to this presentation site plan. It's going to think about it. Okay, just change the way that the stairs are done, so they're conceptual. I'm not sure that it doesn't really make much difference here, but this one. All right, well, let's leave it like that. You notice that these shadows are being cast out to the edge of the ground plane. So maybe this shadow actually should go further. If we want to get true shadows, we'd want to extend the ground, even if it's beyond the property lines, to capture it. But what I'm going to do is use the marquee, and I don't really care about shadows of the site on itself. I'm just going to do a marquee around here. Now remember, this is a 3D view. I'm just happen to be looking down at it, and I'm saying, give me a simplified view with just polygons. Just like I drew a marquee around the perspective with the line work, I'm going to go now and say copy. It'll ask me, what do you want to copy? Scale drawing will be something that we can work with in relationship to other scaled building elements, as opposed to a screenshot. Do I want the edges? I don't really care about the edges of the building. No. Do I want the shadows? Yes, I would like the polygons. That's the boundary, that's the shape of the shadows. I don't need the line work. I don't want a harsh edge line. I just want the shadows, polygons. And there are some options here you could play around with. I'm just going to go here, framed, frameless, overlapping. I'm not sure. Calculate split polygons may be good here. Actually, let's do overlapping. I'm just going to say OK. So what did it do? It just, in the background, copied some stuff. Now I'm going to go to the site plan. So we're going to go to a site plan view here. Let's see, that's design. Let's go to our site plan view here. And what we're going to see is there's some shadows here. I pasted them on earlier. Let me just paste now again. I'm going to paste. You see how what I just pasted came in green, in the same place. I'm just going to drag it over to the side. I'm just going to take it over, oh, let's say a known distance like 100 feet here, and then click. All right, so these are the shadows. I can go in this area, I can say I want to select all of the, so go to the fill tool, select all fills within the marquee here. Looks like there's some boundaries. I'm not quite sure. I don't think this is going to affect anything. These are the ones that the body is within there. And I can change this to, I want the fill to be, a light gray. Here, I want this to be airspace. Let's see, this is, oh, here's the color. It's the background color. I'm just going to make this, light gray there. So that's now a color there. Or I can say select all those ones and make them, 20% here. So now this would be, if I were to drag these over, I'm just going to drag them over, not the right distance, say 90 feet, and you'll see that they've just come in on top of the other elements, but a little bit offset because I didn't do the 100 feet. But that's how you can, and I just undid it, so now it's back to where I had it. So that's how you can get shadows. And of course you may need to go and, clean up some things. These are, some shadow things, and you can go and clean it up. Oh, maybe I just want to simplify this line to here and, get rid of that those extra nodes here. I think if I keep going, I'll probably be able to maybe take this to here. Looks like there's maybe a bunch of little tiny nodes here. Actually, this is now a separate little triangle because of what I did. I'll just delete it. So you can go and you can clean up and fill in holes and things like that. But overall, it's a pretty clean outline. Now, a couple of tricks. Most important thing is that you're in that special 3D view, the vectorial shading. Second is that you want to turn your just the layers on that you want. So in other words, turn off the trees if you don't want that. And third is that you want to use model view options to simplify your building so you don't see like all the little line work from windows or certain things. We are getting a little bit of complex stuff. It's interesting. We can see the shadow of the railing. One possibility would be to turn that railing layer off, if you felt that that was unnecessary, or of course we could go and just delete some of these. Now it looks like this is all unified, so if I deleted this, we'd probably lose a whole bunch, so we don't want to do that. But we could do like a split along here, and now this can be removed. Maybe I want to keep this part here, so I'll split it along this edge, and now these elements, if I wanted to, I could just clean that up here before bringing it back. So that's how you get something like this. The other little thing here is that this is a 2D tree object. If I open it up, this is a tree plan here. It has no 3D, here. So this is a tree plan. So this is specifically for just a plan diagram. And you notice this little shadow or pseudo shadow. What I did was I dragged a copy of it. I'll just drag a copy over here, and I changed the settings on it to be 2D representation. I just gave the fill background. Instead of that, I just gave it a color. I'll just give it a green color right now, like that. And then I put it underneath. So I said, display order, send backward here, and now you can see it's underneath. And of course, I just had it in a particular orientation to there. So you can easily use 2D elements there. Now this is actually a 3D tree model detailed as it shows the tree plan. Certainly if you have that, you may find that you could drag a copy. I'm just going to drag a copy of this off to the side just to show you. I can explode this, reshape, explode into current view. And what that will do is it'll give me the 2D information from it. I say, no, don't keep the original elements. This is not a new tree. This is just a graphic. And now, what is this? It's a fill. And I could go in and say, let's just give it, you know, this green color, but we'll make it 20%. Maybe it's 20%, but it has to be probably like that. It's interesting. That's the background. Oh, we make the background transparent, and the foreground, if I wanted to make it green, I could do that. So now we can drag this in, and you can see how it's starting to give the green color, and I would just put it behind, or bring this one, display order, bring to front. Here, maybe it's already at the front, so I need to take this and put it backward. And, you know, so we could do that. So these lines clearly are, you know, I don't need that because we don't want to emphasize the line work of the shadow. So we could have this fill and drag it in here and take it, you know, maybe 40% or something like that. So that's how you would, you know, work with 3D trees like that, or 2D, to create some sort of clean schematic level shadows, and how you bring in the actual shadows for the building from a true shadow study. So let's see if there's any final questions before we finish up. Thank you for hanging in there with me. All right. So great lecture. A lot of thanks. Got to run. All right. Jim, my skill is very impressive. Thank you. So, final words. As an ArchiCAD user, you have a Ferrari or a Tesla. You have the most amazing vehicle ever created. I mean, not that it's not going to get better next year and all that, but you have the most amazing vehicle ever created. You can create models that have tremendous detail or very simple. You can do very, you know, you have a lot of creative license for design to create almost anything that is currently being built in the world. Maybe Frank Gehry still couldn't quite use ArchiCAD, but almost everything else. When you're presenting to clients, when you're studying things yourself, these graphic tricks hopefully will help you to just take more advantage of the visual flexibility that ArchiCAD has. And just to reiterate one more time, all of these things I showed you today are using the stock ArchiCAD, no special add-ons. The template is not an add-on. The template is a framework for starting projects more quickly. In fact, every template is intended to be a framework for starting projects. And if you have a good template that you've customized or that you've bought somewhere else, or Graphisoft has done a great job, hooray. But if you want to have more of the things that I showed today built in, please check out MasterTemplate. You can go to my main website, bobrow.com, for information on MasterTemplate 22. I do have an intro sale on it that I'll be extending through the end of October, so you can get a nice deal on it. It's my aim to share with you everything I can to help you master ArchiCAD, and that's gives me great pleasure when I see all of you just take off and do some amazing things. So I want to thank you for joining me today. Have fun, be productive, be profitable, and go ArchiCAD. All right, take care.